I received a voodoo doll as a gift. My girlfriend just wrapped up her final clinical rotation this past month. She had been working in New Orleans, a city that's been on my must-visit list for years. Being the thoughtful person she is, she brought back a handful of souvenirs for me. Knowing I'm a big fan of the occult and all things macabre, go figure, one of the gifts she gave me was a voodoo doll. I was thrilled to add it to my little collection of curiosities. The doll stood about 10 inches tall, its body shaped like a T. It had a black cloth torso and wild twine-wrapped arms that stuck out in a sort of chaotic snare. Its lime green eyes, with oversized pupils, stared blankly, and its hot pink lips were frozen in an open-mouthed expression. Was it a scream or a grin? I couldn't tell. A thick tuft of green and blue hair sprouted from its head, reminding me a bit of a troll doll. Last Sunday, while doing my usual weekly cleaning, I got to dusting the shelves, one of which held the voodoo doll. I picked it up to dust underneath, and as I set it back down, it toppled forward and landed face first with a sharp clunk. Right at that exact moment, I heard a shout from outside my open window. I rushed over to see what had happened and spotted an elderly man lying face down on the sidewalk. He stayed in that spread eagle position for a few seconds before slowly lifting his head and looking around, clearly dazed. Even from my second-story window, I could see the whites of his eyes behind the cracked lenses of his glasses. A thin trickle of blood dripped from his left nostril. I called out to ask if he was okay, and he responded with a thumbs up before rising slowly, brushing off his corduroy pants and continuing his stroll as though nothing had happened. I turned back to the voodoo doll, which seemed to be staring at me. Its mouth now looked unmistakably like it was laughing. I made that man fall. It was me. You knocked me over, so I knocked him over. Ridiculous, of course. It was just a souvenir. Surely it was only coincidence. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the old man had floated an inch or two before he hit the pavement. The doll remained untouched for several days after that. That is, until one of my roommates decided to pick it up. Just for context, I live in a house with two other guys. We're all grad students, having gone through undergrad together and now working toward our master's degrees at the same university. One of my housemates walked into my room, beer in hand. He was venting about girl problems when his eyes landed on the voodoo doll. A voodoo doll, huh? He said, running his fingers through its hair. He took a long swig of his Bud Light and went on. Man, if I had one of these for my ex-girlfriend, I'd jab a couple of needles right into that cheating bitch's face. What happened next was unbelievable. It happened so quickly that if I'd blinked, I might have missed it. In a burst of drunken frustration, he swatted the doll, knocking it backward against the wall of the shelf. Then, as if some invisible force had shoved him, he somersaulted backward and slammed into the opposite wall. His beer can hit the floor and began soaking into the carpet. Neither of us spoke. We stared at each other in stunned silence, the only sound in the room coming from the gentle fizzing of the spilled Bud Light. At last I whispered, "Are you okay?" He slowly got to his feet. "Dude, what the fuck?" He emphasized each word, his eyes widening with every syllable until they were as big and round as the old man's had been the week before. Almost in unison, we turned our heads toward the doll. It was upright again, standing just as it had been before, like it had risen on its own. Its grin seemed to taunt us. "Ha ha! You pushed me, so I pushed you! How does it feel, tough guy?" Another stretch of silence. I stepped toward the doll with caution. My hand trembled as I reached out, taking care not to squeeze too hard. Who knew what that might trigger? "Feel anything?" I asked. He shook his head. I held the doll like it was an old grenade I'd stumbled upon in the woods. Carefully, I placed it in a drawer. We needed time to figure out what the hell was going on. According to some questionable sources I found online, New Orleans has long been considered a place of magic. Its history a blend of voodoo rituals and witchcraft. Some believe that the witches who were persecuted during the Salem witch trials in the 1690s fled as far south as they could, eventually settling in what is now New Orleans. There, they brought their magic and found refuge. The French colonists were far more tolerant than the English, allowing these practitioners to live more freely. Over time, their rituals merged with local beliefs and folklore, giving rise to what we now know as Louisiana voodoo. I called my girlfriend. I brought up the doll and asked her where she'd gotten it. She told me it came from a small curiosity shop just off Bourbon Street. She mentioned that the shopkeeper had asked where she was from, and when she said Massachusetts, he asked if she was familiar with their sister shop in Salem. She told him she wasn't. That's when he offered her the doll. I ended the conversation before she could ask me any more questions. After that, I started thinking about how to get rid of the thing. My first instinct was to toss it in the trash, but then I thought about the trash compactor's crushing force and decided against it. Fire? No. Bury it in a big box somewhere? Still no. Tie a weight around it and drop it in a lake? Tempting, but also no. Whatever I ended up doing, I had to consider my roommate, who had unintentionally pissed the doll off. Now, his fate seemed tied to it too. At the time, I figured if I just left it alone, everything would settle down. I couldn't have been more wrong. What happened the following Saturday was traumatic, to say the least. I still don't know whether it was just bad luck or if the doll had somehow positioned itself to be found, but things turned ugly fast. That Saturday, we hosted a party at our house. Up until that point, I'd kept a close watch on the doll and made sure to lock my bedroom door whenever I left. But that night's a blur, thanks to the alcohol I consumed far too freely. There were about 60 people packed into our place. We had a keg and a 10-gallon jug of jungle juice. I went back and forth between the two, and with every hazy refill, I forgot more and more about the doll, which was supposed to be locked in my dresser behind my locked door. At some point during the night, a flicker of panic jolted through me. I remembered the doll. I headed upstairs to check on it. I unlocked my door, or did I? I honestly can't remember, and opened the dresser. The doll was gone. Instantly, a jolt of adrenaline cut through the drunken fog. I tore through my room, searching everywhere in a frenzy, but it was gone, vanished. I bolted downstairs to the kitchen, and that's when my knees nearly gave out. I saw it. One of my classmates had the doll in his hand, waving it around like some kind of twisted trophy. In his other hand, he held a red Solo cup that sloshed over the rim with every exaggerated motion. He danced around, making exaggerated ooga-booga noises at a group of laughing partygoers. The crowd egged him on with cheers. Before I could say a word, another party guest lunged in and grabbed the doll by its head. But the guy holding it wasn't ready to let go, and a brief but fierce game of tug-of-war played out right in front of me. I watched in helpless horror as the doll's head tore clean off, and then I waited, bracing for what I knew was coming. A blood-curdling scream tore through the music, the chatter, the laughter. I heard it before anyone else did and rushed toward the sound. More screams followed, and then, abruptly, the music stopped. The crowd had gathered in the living room, forming a stunned circle. I pushed my way through the wall of bodies and reached the center of the chaos. There, sprawled out on the floor, was my roommate, or what remained of him. His twitching body lay in a pool of blood. His head had been completely severed, rolled off into a corner of the room. His face was twisted in an agonized expression, but what sickened me most was that it looked like a grin. Ha ha! The paramedics had no explanation. The doctors had no explanation. Even the people who witnessed it firsthand were baffled. His head just flew off, one of them had said in disbelief. But the result was undeniable. My roommate was dead. Later that night, desperate and clinging to hope, I tried gluing the doll's head back on. Some irrational part of me believed it might reverse what had happened, maybe bring him back. But of course, it didn't work like that. The next morning, I found the doll sitting back on my shelf. Its head was perfectly reattached, as if nothing had ever happened. It stared at me, that fixed, haunting gaze burning straight through me. Its grin now seemed to scream, "I killed your roommate. I did it. And there's more where that came from. I should have gotten rid of that thing sooner. At the very least, I should have locked it away. Though even then, I doubt that would have stopped it. It would have found a way back, crawling, climbing, slithering like some cursed beetle until it reclaimed its place on my shelf. I hadn't understood the power it held, not until it was far too late. But now I have a plan. I'm heading to Salem, doll in hand. I'm going to find that shop. I'm going to get answers. I can't bring my roommate back, but maybe, just maybe, I can get rid of this goddamn doll before it takes another life. I just hope it doesn't find its next victim before I do." My story continued in Salem. I was driving through town, hunting for the sister shop that had sold the Voodoo Doll, which now sat beside me in the passenger seat. I had buckled it in with a seatbelt, just in case. This earned me plenty of strange looks from other drivers on the highway, but I didn't care. I had no clue where to start, so I figured the witch village would be a solid bet. I scanned the buildings lining either side of the street. The town was quiet, eerily so, like it only truly woke up for Halloween and spent the rest of the year slumbering. I wasn't paying much attention to the road, distracted by the sameness of it all and the restlessness gnawing at my brain. That's when a voice, soft and sudden, snapped me out of my daze. "Watch out, you're going to hit her." The voice had come from the passenger seat. I snapped back to the road just in time to see a woman stepping into my path. She had emerged onto the street like a shadow, her eyes glued to her phone, completely unaware of the 4,000-pound vehicle barreling toward her. I slammed my foot onto the brake. The car stopped with a jolt. Despite the seatbelt, the Voodoo Doll flew forward and hit the dashboard with a dull thud. My eyes followed the woman as she was launched off her feet like some kind of human missile. Her arms flailed wildly before she smacked into the sidewalk across the street. A bystander rushed to her side, clearly shaken by what he'd just seen. But my mind was elsewhere. Forget the girl. Did the doll just talk to me? I leaned over and picked it up, holding it in my hands. For a moment, I just stared at it. Its expression hadn't changed, yet somehow it seemed smug, as if it were silently saying, "Serves her right. Maybe next time she'll pay attention. I needed to get rid of this thing. Fast." After more time spent scouring the streets of Salem, I finally spotted the shop. At first glance, it looked like any other trinket store. Red brick exterior, oversized display windows, and a hanging sign above the door. The name matched the one my girlfriend had mentioned from the New Orleans shop. This had to be the place. I glanced down at the Voodoo Doll and raised it to eye level. "Time to go, buddy," I muttered. It stared back at me with that same unsettling grin. But then I swear I heard it speak again. "Be careful what you wish for." I froze. My heart jumped into my throat. I had to be losing my mind. The damn doll was talking to me, toying with me, crawling deeper into my thoughts. The shop door was propped open. A rack of bumper stickers sat just outside, swaying gently in the breeze. I wondered how busy the store could be this time of year. With the doll gripped tightly in one hand, I stepped inside. An older woman greeted me from behind the counter. She wore a hand-knitted shawl, and her light brown hair was pulled back into a tidy bun. "Hello there. How may I help you?" she said warmly. "I was wondering if you could tell me anything about this doll," I replied. "My girlfriend bought it at a shop down in New Orleans." I placed the doll on the counter. She let out a soft gasp. This doll," she whispered, almost reverently. She slipped on a pair of half-moon spectacles and leaned in for a closer look. "It must have brought you great trouble for you to come all this way." It has, I said, my jaw tightening. My roommate is dead because of it. The woman's expression darkened. Voodoo magic is not something to be trifled with, young man. I didn't want any of this, I snapped. I kept the doll locked up, but it got out. And now my friend is dead, and it's all my fault. Saying it aloud hit me like a punch. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and I fought hard not to cry. The shopkeeper was quiet for a moment. Then she cleared her throat softly and spoke. There is a way to bring your friend back, she said. He was taken by voodoo magic, and with that same power, he can be restored. My heart skipped. How? I asked, not fully believing her. But at this point, what choice did I have? I'd seen enough to make anything possible. It will not be easy. You'll be required to go to great lengths, she warned. Her glasses caught the light as she looked up at me. Are you willing to risk your life? I nodded without hesitation. Anything to bring him back. Anything to make this right. Wait here, the woman said, then disappeared into a back room. A moment later, she returned with a ticket in her hand. First of all, she began, that doll you've been carrying contains a spirit. Not just any spirit, but that of the voodoo queen herself, Marie Laveau. I froze. She was the most feared woman in 19th century Louisiana, and for good reason. A powerful voodoo sorceress, she was capable of both great healing and terrible destruction. Everyone in Louisiana knew her name. People flocked to her rituals and to her funeral. They say she was buried with a smile on her face. A chill ran down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I shuddered. The shopkeeper continued. Now, here is what you must do. Fly to New Orleans, go to St. Louis Cemetery, and find Marie Laveau's grave. Mark it with 3 X's. Then focus your mind on the image of your lost friend. Your thoughts must be clear. Any doubt and it won't work. But if you do it right, you will get your friend back. I blinked. How am I supposed to fly to New Orleans? I don't have that kind of money. She held out the ticket she'd been holding. I took it and examined it. A round-trip flight to New Orleans, departing from Logan Airport. In 2 hours, I stared at her, stunned and speechless. Oh, come now, dear. No, she said with a warm laugh. Surely you believe in a little magic by now. We spoke for a while longer. She gave me more instructions, what to do once I returned to Massachusetts. And most importantly, she offered to take the doll off my hands. I sighed in pure relief. At last, I had a chance to fix everything. I walked out of the shop without looking back. The doll was gone. I was free. I followed her instructions to the letter. I made it to New Orleans, found Marie Laveau's grave, and etched 3 X's into her tomb. I stood there in the stillness of the cemetery, eyes closed, focusing solely on my roommate's face. I held that image in my mind for what felt like 5 full minutes. Nothing happened. No lightning, no gust of wind, no sign that anything had worked. All I could do now was return home and go see my roommate's body, which still rested in the funeral home. I was a little bummed that my visit to New Orleans had been so rushed. I was there for barely an hour, and it was all business. I didn't get to explore or experience the city. Still, I promised myself I'd come back one day when all of this was behind me. By now, I had been awake for over 48 hours. Sleep had eluded me on the flight. My mind was too tangled with anxiety to rest. I was terrified of what I might find. What if the ritual hadn't worked? What if this had all been for nothing, and I'd be standing once again before my friend's cold, lifeless body? I honestly didn't know if my mind could take that. I arrived at the funeral home under the cover of night. I crept in through a window and quietly made my way inside until I found him. There he was. My roommate lay on a steel mortuary table, arms at his sides in a textbook anatomical position. A white linen cloth covered him from the waist down. His skin was pale, an eerie, bloodless white. His head, once severed, had been sewn back on. A thick line of stitches encircled his neck like a macabre choker. The twisted grin he died with was now gone. His face was blank, peaceful. I stood over him, holding my breath. If he were to rise, if this actually worked, it would be nothing short of a miracle. People would call it the second coming. I laughed quietly, the sound manic and cracked. I didn't care what anyone thought. I wasn't doing this for the spectacle. I was doing it to make things right, for him, for me. But nothing happened. I didn't know what to do next. I began to feel foolish, hopeless, defeated. I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A whisper so soft it could have been a breeze across the tiles. Rise. I spun around. My roommate's eyes flew open. He gasped violently as air filled his lungs. He lurched forward, sitting bolt upright, then hunched over and vomited a stream of thick bile onto the floor. I stumbled back, tripping and landing hard. He clutched his chest, coughing, struggling to breathe. But he was alive. Alive. I slowly approached, disbelief etched across my face. Our eyes met. I rushed forward and wrapped him in a fierce embrace. He groaned faintly, but he held on. You're back, I said, my voice cracking. I can't believe it. Tears welled in my eyes. Against all odds, it had worked. He was back. I helped him off the table. His legs trembled beneath him, and for a moment I had to hold him steady until he found his footing. What was it like? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, blank, hollow, dazed. Whatever he'd experienced had left a mark. He couldn't answer. Not yet. Come on, I said gently. Let's get you home. And in the back of my mind, I heard it again. Be careful what you wish for. I should have never brought him back. Someone who crosses the threshold between life and death isn't the same person who returns. That boundary exists for a reason. Who was I to play God, to pull him back from wherever he had gone? His time on earth had ended, and I should have accepted that. But I didn't. I was in way over my head, too blinded by my own guilt and selfishness to see the truth. When I brought him back to our house, he was dazed, utterly silent. He didn't speak a single word. The only sounds he made were low grunts and wheezing breaths, like he had years of dust clogging his lungs. His eyes were glazed over, lifeless like a mannequin's. His skin was bone cold and dry to the touch. Hours passed, and I kept hoping he'd come around. His blood should have circulated by then. His body should have warmed. His complexion should have begun to recover. But his skin remained a dull, lifeless gray. I pressed 2 fingers under his thumb, checking for a radial pulse. Nothing. Then I pressed gently against the side of his neck. There, a faint, weak rhythm. Barely there. I couldn't even be sure it wasn't just my own pulse in my fingertips. The thick stitches that once circled his neck had vanished. All that remained was a pale, jagged scar running just beneath his Adam's apple, like a grim collar etched into his skin. I tried feeding him. No response. I tried talking to him. Still nothing. He just sat hunched over, rocking slowly from side to side like someone trapped in the fog of a terrible hangover or something far worse. I was starting to get seriously worried. That's when I decided to involve my other roommate, Ryan. The moment he saw our supposedly dead friend alive and sitting on the couch, he nearly passed out from shock. His face went white as a sheet. I sat him down and told him everything. The whole story. It took him a while to process it. At first, he flat out didn't believe me, but the sight of our roommate clearly alive and breathing, or something like it, eventually convinced him, at least for now. Ryan, who had been raised in a devout Catholic household, suggested I speak with a bishop. He told me about a holy man he knew of, someone rumored to have once chased a demon from the infamous Amityville horror house. With little left to lose, we drove out to see him, bringing our resurrected roommate along. The bishop lived in a nearby seminary, not far from the city. To our surprise, he agreed to meet with us. The moment I stood before him, I was overwhelmed with a sense of awe. He towered over us, his piercing blue eyes cutting straight through me. Around his neck hung a wooden cross, unlike any I'd seen before. Instead of the typical lowercase t shape, his cross resembled a crooked capital T. Something about it felt ancient. We explained our situation in full. He listened patiently, quietly, nodding now and then. Christ himself once attempted to raise the dead, the bishop said after a moment. His gaze moved slowly over my roommate's lifeless frame. My roommate sat hunched, mouth agape, frozen like a statue mid-scream. The bishop continued, his voice measured and deep. The scriptures tell us that during his time on earth, Jesus confronted humanity's last and most irresistible enemy, death itself. Word came to him that a beloved friend, Lazarus of Bethany, had fallen gravely ill. By the time he reached Bethany, Lazarus had already lain dead in the tomb for 4 days. He paused, then went on. In front of a crowd of mourning Jews, Jesus stood before the sealed tomb and said only, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus obeyed. Still wrapped in his burial cloths, he emerged from the darkness and stepped into the light. The bishop looked again at my roommate, but Lazarus was never the same. The council wanted him crucified. They believed that a man who had returned from the grave was no longer fit to walk among the living, that his place in the world had passed. The time for the dead to walk had not yet come. He lowered his voice almost to a whisper. So Lazarus fled. He wandered the earth, becoming something else entirely, a bridge between the living and the dead. He was given many names throughout the centuries. The most well-known comes from the people of Haiti and Africa. The bishop turned his eyes back to us, locking his gaze on my roommate. They called him Papa Legba. At the mention of that name, my roommate let out a deep groan and began to stir. His body twitched and jerked as he attempted to rise from the chair. Ryan and I rushed forward and restrained him, struggling to hold him down. "You must summon Papa Legba," the bishop declared, his voice low and solemn. He appears as an old man, leaning on a walking cane. The scent of cigar smoke and rum follows him. Those are the signs of his presence. You'll need both in order to make contact. You'll also need an incantation. I do not know what it is. Such things are not mine to meddle with, but I'm certain you can find it on the internet. I stood there for a moment, absorbing everything he had just told me. Then I finally asked, "Will you come with us?" The bishop gave a long sigh. "I'm afraid not, my son. I've been summoned to the Vatican. I have pressing matters there that I must attend to. May God be with you." And that was that. We left the seminary with a new mission. Ryan and I had to carry our resurrected roommate between us, holding him up by his armpits. He was heavy and completely uncooperative. His legs dragged like dead weight beneath him. On the way home, we stopped to buy a box of Cuban cigars and a bottle of Barbancourt rum. As we drove, my thoughts drifted to everything I'd been through since receiving the Voodoo Doll. It had been a whirlwind of supernatural horror, desperate rituals, and blind faith. Somewhere in the chaos, I caught myself wondering if the doll was still safe, locked away in that little shop back in Salem. By this point, I'd read a number of theories online about what might have happened to my roommate. Some of you suggested that a spirit had taken up residence inside him, maybe even Marie Laveau herself. But based on his behavior, I didn't believe that to be the case. He wasn't possessed. He was empty. A shell of the man he used to be, hollow, lifeless, discarded. Maybe he would have made an easy vessel for something to enter him, but as far as I could tell, nothing had. In fact, we never even got the chance to summon Papa Legba. Something happened first, something none of us expected. We had just pulled into the driveway when my roommate suddenly snapped into some kind of manic frenzy. From the back seat, he let out a deep, guttural scream that rattled my bones. Before we could react, he flung open the car door and hurled himself to the ground with shocking force. Unfazed, he scrambled upright and took off sprinting toward our neighbor's house. Although he had always been in good shape, I had never seen him or anyone move like that. He wasn't just running, he was flying. It was like he shattered every record in the 100-meter dash right before our eyes. In seconds, he reached the neighbor's stoop, leapt up the stairs in a single bound, and crashed into their storm door. The glass exploded on impact, shattering from the frame. Then, without hesitation, he slammed his shoulder into the front door, leaving a huge dent in the wood. He staggered for a split second, then regained his stance. With a movement that looked eerily practiced, like a firefighter breaching a locked building, he raised his leg and drove his foot into the door just above the knob. The door exploded off its hinges, and just like that, he vanished inside. Ryan and I had only made it halfway across the lawn, yelling after him, barely processing what was happening. He had moved within human speed. "Shit! He's inside the rower's house," Ryan gasped, panting. He was pale, wheezing from the short sprint. Unlike our possessed roommate, Ryan was in terrible shape. The neighboring house belonged to a few members of the undergrad rowing team. We didn't know them well, just casual acquaintances. And now, our resurrected friend had just broken into their home like a man possessed. We reached the splintered remains of the front door and stepped inside, tense and alert. Our ears strained for any sound. That's when we heard it, a low, steady thump, 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 echoing through the house. It was coming from upstairs. We climbed the staircase, one creaking step at a time, hearts pounding. The sound was rhythmic, methodical, like the distant beat of tribal drums in some forgotten jungle. We followed the sound to a bedroom door, left slightly ajar. The thumping continued on the other side. With a trembling hand, I reached out and nudged the door open. It swung inward slowly. A thick, coppery smell hit us immediately, flooding our noses and turning our stomachs. Blood. I saw my roommate straddling one of the rowers, seated firmly on her chest. In his hand, he gripped a blood-smeared ceramic bowl, probably the one they use for holding house keys. Like he was bringing it down again and again onto her skull with manic force. Thump, thump, thump. Each sickening blow was now accompanied by a wet, crunching sound, the sound of bone fracturing and gray matter being mashed into pulp. Her feet pointed toward us, twitching with every blow. Each time the bowl landed, her legs kicked out slightly, like a dying marionette, like a current of electricity was surging through her shattered body. Then suddenly, my roommate's head jerked toward us. His face was drenched in blood, but his eyes still had that same hollow, glassy emptiness. The rower's head beneath him had been turned into a crater, unrecognizable. Blood and brain matter poured from the ruined cavity like a grisly volcano. Near her body lay a razor blade, its edge streaked with red. A clean cut across her forearm explained it all. She had been self-harming. The scent of her fresh blood must have triggered something primal in my roommate, sending him into a murderous frenzy. What happened next unfolded in a chaotic blur. We stood frozen, locked in a gaze with whatever he had become. Then, without warning, without a single twitch of preparation, he launched himself at Ryan. It was like he skipped a few frames of movement. 1 second he was crouched over the body, the next he was airborne. He slammed headfirst into Ryan's chest with a sickening crack. Ryan let out a breathless grunt as all the air rushed out of his lungs. His eyes rolled back and his body shot backward into the wall. He hit it so hard that he didn't just bounce off. He stuck, literally embedded in the drywall. I snapped my head around to check on him. Ryan looked like he had been stuffed into the wall ass first and left hanging there, limbs limp. His head drooped forward between his knees like a rag doll. I turned my head just in time to see a hand come crashing into the side of my temple. Stars burst across my vision as I lost my footing and tumbled backward onto the bed. My roommate was on me in an instant, clawing, biting, pummeling me with his fists. I fought back with everything I had, but he had the upper hand. His full body weight pressed down on me like a boulder, suffocating and relentless. For a brief, chilling moment, I accepted that this might be it. This was how I was going to die. Then, just like that, a miracle happened. It came through the window with a shattering crash. At first, I thought someone had thrown a rock, But then, without warning, my roommate's body suddenly lifted off of me and slammed into the wall like a rag doll before crumpling to the floor in a heap. I scrambled to my feet, dazed, and looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Amid the broken glass and blood-stained carpet, I saw it, my savior, the Voodoo Doll. I rushed over and picked it up. Its stitched mouth was curved into a wide grin, those bright pink lips looking almost triumphant. I stared at it in disbelief. Then it spoke. "Do it, end it now." My gaze shifted from the doll to my roommate. He was groaning, struggling to rise, swaying unsteadily as he tried to get back on his feet. I understood what needed to be done. With my free hand, I gripped the doll's head tightly and yanked. The fabric tore with a soft rip, and once again the doll's head came off. At that exact moment, so did my roommate's. His head shot from his body like a cork, hit the ceiling, bounced once, and landed on the floor with a sickening thud. His body convulsed, flailing wildly in place before collapsing in stillness. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. I hurried to peel Ryan out of the wall. He was still breathing, thank God. I looked back at the horror show behind us. The blood, the body, the severed head. The police were going to have a hell of a time trying to piece this one together. As for the doll, I've decided to keep her. I've named her Marie. She rests quietly on my shelf now, and I won't let anyone touch her. She seems content here, like she's found her place. It's the least I can do, considering she saved my life. Besides, I need a new roommate.